The committee will come to order. Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome back both new and returning members to the committee. I'm delighted that my friend and colleague, Senator Casey, will once again be serving as the committee's ranking member. And I'm thrilled that we have many new members joining the committee this year, and we welcome them also. This Congress, this committee will continue to focus on key issues affecting American seniors. First, the high cost of prescription drugs. Second, retirement security, making sure that our seniors have the financial resources that they need for their retirement and that they don't outlive their savings. Third, greater investment in biomedical research for diseases like Alzheimer's and diabetes that disproportionately affect older Americans. And fourth, stopping financial schemes and other scams targeting older Americans. In today's hearing, we will look at the progress being made to coordinate and strengthen the fight against these scams and explore what further steps could be taken to protect our nation's seniors. Combating this type of fraud has long been a focus of this committee. In fact, this is the 22nd hearing that the Aging Committee has held during the past 6 years to examine scams affecting older Americans. Previously, we have highlighted the notorious IRS imposter scam, the Jamaican lottery scheme, computer tech support fraud, grandparent scams, elder financial exploitation, identity theft, romance scams, and the drug mule scam, where seniors are tricked into unwittingly serving as drug couriers. A number of critical points have emerged from our work. First, many scams are perpetuated by criminals operating from foreign call centers beyond the reach of state and local law enforcement, and thousands of miles from the seniors whom they victimize. The criminal networks behind these scams typically maintain crews of runners within the United States to launder the money stolen from victims and send it overseas as quickly as possible using wire transfers or gift cards. Fighting these scams requires a coordinated response led by the federal government in close cooperation with state and local law enforcement, the private sector, and stakeholder organizations. I'm pleased to say that law enforcement has stepped up its efforts to combat these networks. A good example is the takedown of 5 call centers based in India and the arrest of their U.S.-based co-conspirators in late 2016. The case against these fraudsters culminated last year in the sentencing of 24 individuals in the U.S. to prison terms, coupled with orders to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in restitution to their victims. This case illustrates the power of coordination. 3 federal agencies led the investigation, assisted by local law enforcement in 4 states and more than a dozen U.S. attorneys' offices around the country. A number of other federal and international agencies provided significant support. Another excellent example of the value of coordination was the sweep of elder fraud cases last February, the largest of its kind in our nation's history. This sweep resulted in criminal charges against more than 200 defendants who had engaged in elder fraud schemes in which victims lost more than $500 million. The sweep included cases in which more than 50 districts and involved multiple federal, state, and international law enforcement agencies. We have learned in our prior hearings that combating fraud is a lot like playing that frustrating game of whack-a-mole. Con artists are ruthless in their efforts to devise new schemes to defraud their victims. Although the scams we've examined differ in scope and structure, one factor is common to all. The fraudsters need to gain the trust and active cooperation of their victims. Without this, their schemes would fail. Oftentimes, these criminals harass their victims into cooperating with them. Other times, they seduce them into cooperating with them. That is why it is so important that seniors and the public at large recognize as quickly as possible the red flags that signal potential fraud. Coordinated efforts to educate the public to the scammers' tactics are therefore critical, and that's one of the reasons that we have held this series of hearings. Another key point that has emerged from our investigations is how much the scammers depend upon technologies like caller ID spoofing, robocalling, wire transfers, and gift cards to perpetuate their schemes. This problem is only getting worse. Last year, the Federal Trade Commission logged an incredible 3.8 billion complaints about robocalls, and some experts estimate that nearly half of all mobile phone calls will be fraudulent by the end of this year, unless technology is deployed to identify and block those calls. This committee has repeatedly stressed the need for regulators and the business community to work more aggressively to stop scammers from using inexpensive technology to facilitate their fraudulent schemes. There is a counter technology, and I find the lack of progress in deploying this protective technology to be very troubling. This year, we're going to redouble our efforts to ensure that this persistent problem is solved. Today, we are also releasing our updated 2019 fraud book. As we have done for the past several years, this book lists the top 10 scams perpetrated against seniors that are reported to our committee's fraud hotline. The book includes tips for recognizing, avoiding, and reporting these common scams. Once again, the IRS impersonation scam, in which a criminal calls an unsuspecting victim pretending to work for the IRS and claiming wrongly that the victim owes unpaid taxes and demanding payment immediately, is the #1 most reported scam on our list. Despite the work of this committee and of our witnesses, far too many seniors are still losing money, and often their retirement savings, to con artists. Stopping these scam artists requires a coordinated response from all levels of government, from advocacy groups, from the private sector. But the fact remains that alert citizens are our #1 defense. I'm proud of the committee's work to help seniors become more aware and more informed, and to put those heartless, ruthless criminals on notice that they will be caught and brought to justice. I very much appreciate the extraordinary group of witnesses that have joined us today, and I'm now pleased to turn to our ranking member, Senator Casey, for his opening statement.
Chairman Collins, thank you very much, and thanks for having this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses. This is a critically important issue that so many Americans talk to their elected representatives about, and it's critical that we continue our work on this issue. We know that though underreporting causes experts to struggle to estimate the total financial impact of scams and financial abuse targeting seniors, we do know that it adds up to at least $3 billion a year. This number is staggering, and that might be an understatement, but the impact a con artist, just one con artist, can have on the life and even the livelihood of a victim and their family is much, much worse than any number. As we'll hear today, some scammers are able to rip away tens of thousands of dollars from our loved ones, robbing them of their nest eggs and threatening their retirement security. This is why government officials at all levels and our partners in the private sector must do everything we can to prevent scams before they happen. Each one of us has had the experience of watching a parent or a relative age, and with that, the experience of worrying about their financial security. And so everyone who can play a role in stopping scams must play a role in this effort. Thankfully, we've had some good progress. For example, in Pennsylvania, the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, recently announced a commitment from 3 major retailers to change their policies to protect consumers from scams. These retailers will reduce the total net worth of gift cards that can be purchased in one visit. This is so important because in growing numbers, con artists are asking for the barcode number on gift cards as a form of, quote, payment, unquote. These retailers have also committed to increasing the training employees receive on how to spot a scam and how to stop it. The collaboration between Pennsylvania's Attorney General and these companies is one that we should replicate. And so I'm proud today to reintroduce the Stop Senior Scams Act with Senator Moran, who joins us here today. And I'm grateful to be working with Senator Jerry Moran on that effort. This bill will bring together the best minds from the public and the private sectors to develop solutions to ensure that seniors do not lose one more penny to a scam artist. It is a common sense proposal. It has the support of organizations like AARP, Consumer Union, the National Retail Federation, MoneyGram, and many more. And as we will hear today from Erica Flavin, the effect of scams on seniors' lives is too great for us to not fight back. Again, I want to thank Chairman Collins and the members of this committee for being here today, and for Chairman Collins once again holding this hearing, and we look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you very much, Senator Casey. We will now turn to our witnesses. First, I will defer to the ranking member to introduce our witness from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Chairman Collins. Erica Flavin is our witness from Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, and southeastern Pennsylvania. Erica will tell us about how her parents lost over $80,000 to a grandparent scam. Erica, we want to thank you for bringing this story to us. I was saying to you earlier as we were talking that I want you to convey our gratitude, the gratitude not only mine, but the gratitude of this committee and well beyond this committee to you and to your family and your parents for making it possible for us to learn from what happened. It's got to be very difficult to tell and retell this story, but it does help a lot of people when you do that. So please thank your parents and your family for that. I also want to thank you for traveling here today, as is true of our other witnesses, to share this story. and your willingness to shine a spotlight on harmful scams and the positive impact that will have on people's lives and preventing other families from going through what your family experienced. I also want to recognize your son Timothy, who joins you here today. Thank you again for being here. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to a special guest for the committee today, my friend and colleague, Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, who as chairman of the Senate Commerce Subcommittee on Consumer Protection has also done a lot of work to combat scams targeting seniors. And I would invite him to introduce the witness from the state of Kansas.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much for the opportunity, the invitation to be here to introduce my Attorney General, the Attorney General of the state of Kansas. And before doing that, I'd thank you for hosting this hearing in regarding elder fraud. Fighting elder fraud is a noble cause. I was thinking to say what a timely moment it is to have this hearing. But as I thought about those words, there is no time in which this issue, unfortunately, is not important. So there's no one moment. It's a constant battle that we face. And I also would like to thank the ranking member for his leadership, of course, on this subcommittee, but for him teaming up with me and our office, our team, as we pursue the Stop Senior Scams Act. It is designed to make certain that retailers, financial institutions, wire transfer companies, others have the resources necessary to train their employees so we can stop fraud as it is occurring on their premises. Bob, it's been a pleasure to work with you on this and other issues in the United States Senate. My primary mission of the morning is to welcome and to thank the Attorney General of Kansas, Derek Schmidt, who comes here not just as the Attorney General, that's an honor in and of itself, but comes as an advocate on behalf of Kansas seniors and, in fact, American seniors. He is the immediate past president of the National Association of Attorneys Generals, and his initiative during his tenure in that position was titled Protecting America's Seniors, Attorney Generals of the United States Against Elder Abuse. And as our Attorney General has been responsible for significant and important initiatives, he combined within his department and created an entity called Fraud and Abuse Litigation Division, in which there is a focus on elder abuse, and it houses our statutory abuse, neglect, and exploitation unit. Derek is a former Senate staffer, was a Senate staffer before I was a senator, where he worked for United States Senator Nancy Kassebaum, someone who remains highly regarded and revered on this and other issues in Kansas and across the country. So, Attorney General, thank you for your service to the people of the state of Kansas, and thank you for sharing today your knowledge and information and advice and suggestions to the United States Senate.
Thank you very much, Senator Moran. I'm delighted that from the great state of Maine, we will hear today from Candace Simeone. She is the president and founder of the York County Elder Abuse Task Force, and she works as a law enforcement officer at the Kennebunk Police Department in Kennebunk, Maine. In 2018, Officer Simeone worked on an astonishing 77 elder justice cases, including 3 that have been referred to the local district attorney. She has really been such a leader in this area in the state of Maine. I wish we could clone her and put her in every community in the state and in the country. And we thank you for being here today. Next, and our final witness this morning, we'll be hearing from Judith Kozlowski. She serves as an expert consultant on elder justice matters within the Department of Justice. And she told me this morning that she last testified on this very issue 25 years ago. So it shows how dedicated she has been. And it also shows that this has been a problem for a very long time. and I think it's now getting the attention that it deserves. She'll provide insight into how the federal government fosters coordination among federal agencies to better protect seniors from scammers. So I thank you all for joining us, and we will start with Ms. Flavin.
Good morning. I'd first like to thank Ranking Member Senator Casey and Madam Chairperson Senator Collins for inviting me to speak regarding the recent scam that was perpetrated on my parents. Over the course of their lifetime, my parents have held a variety of jobs. My father worked several jobs throughout his career and was also a member of the Army Reserve. My mother worked in a variety of light manufacturing jobs and later served as a teacher's aide. Unfortunately, last year, my parents became victims of the grandparent scam. My parents were contacted on the 17th of September by a supposed lawyer representing their grandson, my nephew, who had allegedly been involved in a car accident in Tennessee, was in jail for a DUI, and needed $10,000 cash for bail. My parents withdrew $10,000 and mailed the money as instructed. On the 19th of September, the supposed lawyer told my parents that my nephew had been rearrested on charges of vehicular manslaughter due to the loss of a fetus in the accident of the car that he allegedly hit. This time, his bail was now $50,000. They withdrew $40,000 more. This time, my father had to sign a document that he was not being taken advantage of, but the bank asked no further questions. They were told to wrap the money in carbon paper so that it would look like a book before mailing it. On the 21st of September, that lawyer told my parents that the charges against my nephew would be reduced and he would be able to go free if damages were paid for the balance of what insurance did not cover. This amount was $30,544. They again mailed the money as they were told, and were also told that they would receive the bail money back that they had put up, a total of $50,000. During some of these calls, my parents spoke to someone claiming to be my nephew, but who said he sounded different because of a broken nose because of the alleged car accident he was in. On the 28th of September, they received one final phone call from the phony lawyer asking for another $20,000. The phony lawyer said he needed $20,000 retainer for successfully defending my nephew. My parents refused to send any more money and decided that my nephew's parents should be the one to retain him as an attorney. When they did not get the bail money back, they contacted my sister and quickly learned that my nephew was where he was supposed to be, in college. It was then that my parents knew that they had been scammed. My parents contacted local law enforcement to file a police report, but assumed they were not getting back any of their money. Financially, my parents gave away $80,544. This was most of my father's thrift saving plan retirement account. This was money that was supposed to be used to help with those life expenses one incurs as they age. Between their Social Security and pension, their living expenses are covered, but there is little to no money for any large emergency. My father spoke to the banker afterwards, and the banker admitted that he thought something was going on, but he was not allowed to say anything. I disagree. The banker does not have the right to stop my father from taking out his money. Banks can be a first line of defense in helping educate seniors about these types of scam. The emotional wreckage that this whole thing provoked to me is far worse. My mother is in a constant state of anxiety and feels that she's a bad grandmother because she didn't recognize that the voice was not her grandson's. My father has flashbacks to a time when his family had to put up their house for bail when his younger brother was arrested. My siblings and I were heartbroken that our parents went through this all alone, since they were originally told that they were under a gag order and wanted to respect their grandson's wishes not to share this with their mother. I also understand that my parents may not have understood or recognized potential signs of the scams due to them being so devoted to their grandchildren. I would again like to thank my parents for giving me permission to tell their story in the hope that it can help someone else. In the words of my father, we are bent, we are not broken. We will survive this incident. In a way, it feels like a sad death in the family. If you're not busy, thoughts creep into your head. Why? How could people do this to other people? I gave away $80,544. How could I be so stupid? An incident or an innocent conversation can set off feelings of sadness bordering on depression. You have to fight it and not let it get you down. We realize we will never see the money. We still have a mortgage, 2 10-year-old cars, 2 cats, and our family. Thank you again, Senator Casey and Senator Collins, for inviting me here to tell my parents' story.
Thank you so much for your courage in coming forward. That is just heartbreaking. But my hope is that others who hear this testimony will be more on guard when they get similar calls because of the courage of your parents and you in telling your story. We'll have additional questions for you later, and I'm now going to call upon Officer Simeone. Before I do, I want to recognize that there is another member of the York County Task Force who is with us today, Karen Dillon, who works at the local hospital. And we talked this morning about how healthcare workers can play a role in identifying fraud or exploitation or abuse. Officer Simeone.
Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Casey, and members of the committee, I am humbled and honored to be here before you today. Thank you for the opportunity and for your commitment to protecting our older Americans. I am the founder and the president of the York County Elder Abuse Task Force. I am also a law enforcement officer at the Kennebunk Police Department. Over my law enforcement career, I've had the opportunity to complete extensive training in the field of elder abuse. I'm proud to have been part of numerous advances in combating elder abuse over the past 15 years. I have a true passion for being the voice of our vulnerable populations, primarily our elderly and those with disabilities. I hear heartbreaking stories like Mrs. Flavin's parents all the time, and I respect your courage to be here today. In fact, last year I worked on over 70 elder justice-related cases, ranging from simple scams to the loss of entire estates. I started the York County Elder Abuse Task Force in 2005. Once I realized that the multidisciplinary approach was so vital to protecting our elders, I knew I had to make it happen. My very first cases were incredibly difficult. I had so many questions. Within my profession, I could not find those answers. So I started visiting others who I thought could help me with the victims in my cases. The majority did not understand what elder abuse even was. It was a goal of mine to educate not only myself, but as many others as possible. In doing so, I built credibility, sparked some passion in others, and developed an incredibly solid task force with a group of professionals that I can count on when I need help. I realized that the initial goal for these cases should never be about prosecution. Instead, it should be about preventing further victimization as much as possible, and then work to develop a case. The York County Elder Abuse Task Force is a group of committed professionals from many different fields. We come together to share our knowledge and skills to serve as a resource to educate the public. We rely on each other to remedy our cases as effectively as we can and count on our skills to be an asset to victims and witnesses alike. The County of York is our primary focus, but making an impact nationally is our goal. But the most important goal for the task force is education. We vow to educate ourselves as much as possible so that we can be an asset to others. The group conducts mobile awareness discussions and presentations throughout our county and in our entire state. We coordinate senior safety roadshows where we give 30-minute talks on current scams in their particular areas. We encourage local law enforcement and town general assistance representatives to attend with us as we meet residents of their community. In addition, I instruct the Elder Abuse segment at the Maine Criminal Justice Academy for all cadets that become law enforcement officers in the state of Maine. We host a very successful conference focused on the importance of the multidisciplinary approach to elder abuse. I started this event 11 years ago. This, to us, is an example of building credibility and exemplifying the multidisciplinary mindset. At this year's conference, we were pleased to be joined by the newly appointed Elder Justice Coordinator at the U.S. Department of Justice. We distributed copies of this committee's fraud book to more than 100 attendees. I recognize the need for a specialized focus on our elder population the very first year I became a law enforcement officer. While dealing with a personal case involving my own grandfather, I also recognize the vulnerability of the community that I worked in. The York County coastline is inundated with retirees and many elders living alone. As a matter of fact, according to the 2017 U.S. Census data, the state of Maine is the oldest state in our nation still. The population of Maine over the age of 65 is nearly 20%. In Kennebunk, that same population is over 35%. With this knowledge, it's our duty to act. Traditionally, law enforcement has dealt with crime committed by and against a younger population. This population shift and the increase in crime targeted specifically against older Americans requires the development of specialized services to address elderly victims of crime. Fraud through the mail is fascinating to me, and not in a good way. One piece to the multidisciplinary approach for me has been my work with the U.S. Postal Investigators. I have learned a great deal from them. Seeing international scammers make our domestic elders unknowing vessels of fraud is heartbreaking. The innocent U.S. elders losing everything and taking other unsuspected victims along is devastating. The investigations are time-consuming, the resources are limited, and the law protecting this population from crime is not simple to prove. We need to move forward now with protecting our elders. The state of Maine would be an incredible place to start these greater initiatives. Together, we could pave the way to be an example for other states to follow. I encourage this committee to consider two strategies that would help professionals like me help our elders. One, I believe statute needs to be modified or changed to protect victims, even when they don't believe that they are victims. With reactive elder abuse, there's little hope for recovery because of the devastating effects of these situations. Those of us on the front line need to be more proactive to inform our elders, but we also need help lifting limitations of the current law when we do have to react. Many of the cases I see stall at the victims themselves. They don't want to recognize that they are in fact a victim. They can't comprehend why someone would manipulate them or prey on their innocence. Their abuser is often considered charismatic and comforting, something that those elders have not felt in a very long time. And two, I encourage the development of specialized law enforcement positions in each state, elder exploitation investigation teams, much like the Drug Enforcement Agency units, with the ability to arrest, see cases from start to finish. They need to work with multiple organizations and send solid messages to all of our residents about the seriousness of our efforts while directing message directly to those who are targeting our elders. I'm so grateful to be among all of you today, and I truly hope you understand the hope that you not only give to me, but to our older Americans. Chairman Collins and Ranking Member Casey have been so instrumental in recognizing the importance of this in tackling this catastrophe. Chairman Collins has been noted in many of my annual conferences that my task force holds and even contributed a wonderful keynote video in 2017. She gives me hope, and this committee gives me hope. Thank you all for your hard work in publishing the fraud books. They're available at our conferences every year. It's time to bring knowledge and new initiatives to the forefront to send messages that this epidemic is hidden no longer. I've been working really hard in my state for many years, and I'm at a point where I need help on the federal level. I hope that we can work together towards fighting this touchy subject, this hidden epidemic, so that statistics do not increase the way that they are predicted to do. Again, I thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, not only for your testimony, but for your passion for this cause and your leadership. Attorney General Schmidt.
Chairman Collins, thank you very much. Ranking Member Casey, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. You have my written testimony, and if it's agreeable, I'll let it speak for itself and perhaps just talk with the committee about some of the highlights in my oral presentation. A couple of points. Number one, this is a subject matter for me personally that through no strength of my own became an interest of mine early in my law enforcement career. I was an assistant attorney general 20 years ago now. I was assigned to the Consumer Protection Division, something I'd candidly never thought about doing when I first took the job. And because of that, was exposed to a variety of scams and ripoffs, particularly of elder Kansans. And it's the sort of thing that makes your blood boil once you see it and inspires you to try to do more. So It's an area we've tried to focus on throughout my career at the Kansas AG's office and in our national association, as Senator Moran mentioned this past year. I usually tell folks that there are, when you cut through all the numbers and the analysis that the smart folks give, for me there are three factors that have converged that make this a timely topic that will remain timely throughout all of our public service. Number one is simply the number of Americans over the age of 65, and whatever the current accurate numbers are. I know I've looked at data sets that show that between 1900 and 2010, so a century and a decade, the number of Americans in that age group grew from around 5 million to around 40 million. I think we're around 50 million today, if I'm not mistaken. That's also a larger percentage of the population, not merely a larger number. We went from about 3% to about 12%, and we have somewhere in the range of 10,000 Americans a day turning age 65, and that's going to remain true for at least the next decade, for the foreseeable future. So the target population, for lack of a better term, is growing and is going to continue to grow. That's factor number one. Factor number two, it is perhaps a softer factor, but I think it's real. It certainly is in my experience. Because of the generation we're talking about, there are certain generational characteristics that tend to create vulnerabilities. Some are, some are my mom. She won't hang up the phone without explaining to somebody why she's going to hang up the phone. She feels a need to be polite, and that's not unique to her. It's a reality. Some is loneliness. That was mentioned, I believe, by you, Chairman, in your opening, and that is certainly true. We see those cases time and time again where somebody falls victim because they know something's amiss, but at least somebody's talking to them on the phone or somebody's engaging them in conversation, and they'll take the financial risk in order to have somebody who will actually talk with them. To some extent, of course, it's physiological. There are certain changes that often are associated with aging that can make somebody more vulnerable to scams. So that's the second factor, a greater number of people with a greater vulnerability. And the third factor is one we don't talk about as much, which is simply the money. The median household wealth of an American family with at least one member age 65 and older today is somewhere in the range of $240,000. That is the most wealthy, on average, demographic age-wise in the United States, and at risk of overstating the case, because we are in the richest country in the history of the world, it is probably the most wealth concentrated in any age-based demographic in the history of the world. So you have more targets, perceived and in reality as more vulnerable, with more money than ever before. It shouldn't be surprising that the problem is exploding and is going to continue to. That's point number one. Point number two, I might just mention a few particulars that my testimony highlights, things I think we could do, concrete steps. They're not panaceas, but I think they're worth focusing on. One is on the robocall side. We aren't going to fix this problem without the tech companies being our partners. We simply aren't. The volume is too large. The inability to find these folks halfway around the world calling in with virtually free calls over fiber is too great. We're going to have to shut them down in the first instance, or we're not going to make material progress. We've tried from the Attorney General community side. We have an ongoing working group with the tech companies. We're not techies. They're not law enforcers. We're trying to at least talk the same language so that we can help encourage changes that enable them to not only make available but promote to their users, particularly their elder users, simple technologies that can actually shut this stuff down before the phone actually rings. And so that's number one. Number two is education and outreach. I realize it's a soft commentary and we all say it, but it is absolutely true. If people don't tell the stories, if pride gets in the way and we're unable to share, this happened to me, to my neighbor, to a friend at church, to somebody I worked with, to somebody at the local nursing home, it is so easy to believe it doesn't happen here, and the reality is it is widespread, and I will guarantee it's happened to either somebody, for everybody in this room, it's either happened to you or to a loved one or to someone you've known, and I suspect we all know that. We've got to tell the stories, and we've got to educate on ways to spot and avoid. Number three, that federal-state partnership that you mentioned, Chairman, is absolutely critical. I offer a suggestion in my testimony on a model we've looked at in Kansas. I'd be glad to share more about that later if you like, but it's a very simple concept on how we can partner with some of the regional offices of some of the federal law enforcement agencies to try to improve prosecution of cases that, because of thresholds and caseloads, are unlikely to receive the attention of the U.S. Attorney's offices, not through any fault of the U.S. Attorneys, simply because of volume and prioritization. Number 4, I mentioned a bill, I won't dwell on it here, but there is a bill in the House that I testified on last year that would alter a federal law restriction on the scope of use for our Medicaid fraud control units. Essentially, it would remove a barrier in federal law to allow us to use those existing federal state assets to go after more patient abuse, not just fraud on the taxpayers and the system, but more patient abuse, losses to individuals. I think it makes eminent sense. It got out of House Energy and Commerce on a voice vote. It has bipartisan sponsorship in the House, but I'm not aware it's gotten much attention in the Senate yet, and I would just bring that to your attention. And finally, it's not my written testimony, but I would close by underscoring what Officer Simeone said. We have also concluded that the multidisciplinary team approach is absolutely indispensable at the local and state level to being able to address this problem in a systematic manner. And anything we can do to assist in the development and support of those MDTs would be very much welcomed. And I thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much for your excellent suggestions. Ms. Kolosky.
My great thanks to the committee for allowing me this opportunity to share with you this morning some of my experiences and observations in the field of elder abuse and financial exploitation. I've worked in this field a very long time. I've had lots of different jobs, but always focused on trying to think about how we can better approach systemically the issue of elder abuse and financial exploitation. We've made a lot of progress, particularly in the federal area, in this area, but as we know, there is a growing problem and a growing demographic. Whenever I do this work, though, I always think of my Uncle Howard, who was a small businessman and a World War II veteran. He also had Alzheimer's disease, and during that time, he was targeted by an investment scam in Southern California, which was cleverly targeted at the entire leisure world where he lived. He lost everything. He had pennies on the dollar when everything was done, and my aunt was forced to place him in a public facility during the last year of his life. She was his business partner. She was legally blind. And she took 3 buses each way, each day during his last year to visit him. That was not the life they planned for, and that was not the life that they deserved. I've met many victims over the course of my prosecutorial career who have been in similar situations, but because my Uncle Howard was my very favorite, I always remember him. I started my career in the district attorney's office in New York County, wherein I still carry with me many of the lessons I learned there as a prosecutor. I moved to the Securities and Exchange Commission, where I worked on investment frauds, particularly small offerings and penny stock cases, and this is where I think it cemented my prosecutorial heart and my introduction to the devastation wrought by victims of financial crimes. As my career has continued as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of Florida and here in the District of Columbia, also at the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority and the CFPB, and as a senior advisor at the Administration for Community Living, also as a consultant at HHS, and now back again as a consultant with the Department of Justice. I've learned so much more about the issues of cognition and the social challenges and the work that's necessary beyond law enforcement and the complexity of supporting older adults. The necessity that we have, as everyone here has said, of multidisciplinary action. It is hard to age, and it's also hard for us to address those issues without including a multidisciplinary approach. One of the most effective multidisciplinary changes that the federal government has made was to create and stand up the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. It's a 12-member agency group with a working group of staff members from those agencies, worked on 8 recommendations to help guide and create an architecture to build a federal response to elder abuse and financial exploitation. And I must tell you, when many of those agencies first started, they looked around and wondered, well, we don't do anything in aging. We don't have aging in our title. We couldn't possibly belong here. And over time, I cannot tell you how many more committed people we have in the field of aging from that very moment. There are many agencies that have added components of those agencies to the EJCC, and together many great things have occurred in the collaboration of members of the committee and other people and agencies, nonprofits, and private sector have been brought into the conversation. But let me highlight just a few things for you. In working through the EJCC, we were able to produce the interagency guidance on privacy and reporting financial abuse for older adults. We also helped build the Department of Justice's website with robust financial exploitation resources, and every member of the council has contributed to building that website to be able to make it a premier place for information and training across the nation at both the state and local level, as well as for federal initiatives. There have been collaborations now between the Postal Inspection Service, the Administration for Community Living, and many of its resources, the Department of Justice, and the Community for National and Community Service. I cannot tell you, by just getting people in the room and talking about these issues and sparking conversations, how many initiatives have come out of those conversations with the understanding that there is a federal commitment to the issue of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The EJCC has also been able to leverage its membership for extraordinary dissemination of materials. The Pass It On campaign from the Federal Trade Commission is one. The fiduciary guides of managing someone else's money from the CFPB. It's also been instrumental in discussing what kinds of innovation and research grants might be available to be given. And training has become part of the rock of this particular group, and especially cross-disciplinary training. We're no longer just training law enforcement agents alone. There are many other professionals in the room to learn not only from law enforcement, but from law enforcement to learn from them as well. Including civil legal services in this work is critical. When an older adult is upended because of financial exploitation, their life is devastated. There are many civil legal aspects to that, to the recovery of that person. Let me also just briefly talk about the Elder Abuse Prosecution and Protection Act that was passed last year. By putting together an elder justice coordinator in every federal district and requiring FBI training, it has moved the field. We don't have the caseload numbers yet, but I can tell you, I just know that knowing that there is someone in a U.S. Attorney's Office makes all the difference in the world, and the FBI's commitment to training has been really extraordinary, including victim witness advocates, neuroscientists, and elder abuse experts in their training, along with requiring community outreach in that statute, has been really important as we build more multidisciplinary work within the field. One of the other initiatives I'd like to talk about that came out of also working together with local groups has been something from the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, who just finished putting together roll call videos on elder abuse. These videos can be used and downloaded from their website for all 30,000 members of the IACP. They really focus on the issue that the local police officers can be there and are critical to this work. My cases, as I did them, I couldn't do them without multidisciplinary work. I couldn't do them without cooperation. I'll only mention one case to the committee where we had 4 federal law enforcement agencies. We had 3 local police departments. We executed search warrants in 4 different states. I had cooperation of financial institutions. We seized, cars and homes. We did search warrants, but we couldn't do that without federal and state and local cooperation. It is the way. It's not only the way of the future. It is the way of now. It is the way we get these cases done, particularly large scams. We've mentioned education this morning, but I would like to say that I think public awareness is key. Getting the information out is really, really important. And we could also do more in producing PSAs. There was one done at the Attorney General's office in the state of New York this year on the grandparent scam. Dr. Ruth Westheimer also was part of that because she was, in fact, a victim. She wanted to participate to get that message out to others. In that, teenagers talk directly to the camera, to their grandparents, to say, don't do it. I love you. Don't send your money. Call me first. Please call me first. I've also learned that in many of the tribal communities, that intergenerational approach has been extraordinarily successful in this particular field, and I urge that education, particularly also financial literacy education and multi-generational approaches, be part of what we do. Financial services has been key in growing the field. The Senior Safe Act, as we mentioned earlier, was part of that. NASA's model rule, adopted now in 19 states, about to be adopted, I think, this year in at least 5 or 6 more. And the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association has a working group on senior investors, bringing together on a regular basis those members in that field, holds regional meetings, and produced a magnificent handbook for investors and brokers. FINRA rules of the trusted contact and transactional hold have changed the world, and I can't say enough about how important it has been for the financial services industry writ large to be part of this effort in not only reactive after something has happened, but preventative. They have every interest in keeping those assets in their institutions. We need to continue to encourage better training and for tellers and for supervisors. We've mentioned a little bit about technology this morning, a whole field we haven't even really explored, but has all kinds of potential in preventative use against frauds. We also have to remember, while these tech frauds get lots of publicity sometimes, it's really about 20% of where elder abuse and financial exploitation lie. Most of our seniors are victimized by trusted people and by family members. So I think we also need to think about when future initiatives to be able to focus on that as well. Whenever I do this work, I come back to 2 things. The highest risk factors are social isolation, which goes to everything we've talked today about, certainly, as you said, that alert citizens are our #1 defense. There is no question that that is the case. And cognitive impairment, we don't know enough about what happens with an aging brain, and we still need to know that as well. We are woefully behind in collecting any kind of usable data. That is a subject for an entire hearing, in my view, but there have been beginnings. I'm sorry I went way over my time. I apologize to the committee for that, but I thank you very much.
Thank you. Your testimony was fascinating. Ms. Flavin, I want to take off where the witness just concluded when she talked about the necessity for cooperation from financial institutions. I thought it was heartbreaking when you described your father going to the bank, making 3 huge withdrawals that were not consistent with this pattern. First one, no one asked any questions. Second one, he was asked to sign a statement, but no one really engaged him and asked him, what is it going for, or do you really want to do this? Those kinds of questions. I do want to give you a little good news on that front, and that is a bill that I authored last year with former Senator Claire McCaskill became law. It's called Senior Safe, and we got the idea from the state of Maine. And what it does is it encourages banks, credit unions, other financial institutions to train their employees to ask more questions. And it also says that if they report a suspicious transaction to the appropriate authorities, they're not violating bank privacy laws. Do you think that that law would have been helpful in your father's case?
Absolutely. When I was asked to testify and got the green light to post that I was going to be here on Facebook today, I sent it out to my coworkers. As a compliance specialist, that's my job, to look into what new rules, regulations, and to make sure people are educated. I had one person come up to me and say, my parents were victims of the grandparent scam as well. They got $1,500 the first time, and they were sending it through a electronic money sending agency. And when they were asked for more money, they went back to the same place, got the same employee, and that employee took it upon themselves to go, are you sure that this is what you want to do? This sounds like it might be a scam. So having somebody come up to my parents after they had, contributed $80,000 to a con artist is disheartening, especially when the banker says he couldn't do that, but he suspected something was going on. It's a smaller bank, and that may be a resource issue for them. But absolutely, having better education for these, especially for smaller banks, would have absolutely helped them.
Thank you. Officer Simeone, you handled an extraordinary number of cases last year, more than 75 cases. And you're also very active in educating seniors. You also are very well known in your community and your county. So I think people perhaps feel more comfortable in reporting what's happening. But I want to hear from you. Why don't you think that more seniors come forward?
So we know that 90% of all suspects actually are those who the elder loves or considers family members. So it's very difficult for an elder to come to somebody, a face that they don't really know, and tattle on the people who they love the most in this world. So that's very difficult for them. We also know that as we get older, we fear the loss of our independence, and we know also that cognitive impairment comes into play. And so it's a great fear for our elders to come forward to say that maybe I'm losing some independence. They think that maybe they will end up in a nursing home. And so that's a fear that we often get from victims that they didn't want to tell because they were afraid someone was going to think they were having some cognitive issues. The last thing is that victims don't believe that somebody could really manipulate them to the point where they would take all of their money. So again, it's a generational thing that we talked about earlier, that they can't believe that somebody would prey on their vulnerabilities and take advantage of them the way that they are doing right now. So.
The Attorney General made a point about seniors being too polite on the phone, and we see that in Maine all the time. So particularly if they're living alone, they're lonely or isolated, and someone calls them up and is a total con man and tries to take them into their confidence, and they are reluctant, they feel it's rude to just hang up the phone. Sure. What we're thinking of is coming up with a card that would list things you can say. And one of the worst things to say is, I'm busy right now, but could you call back later? Because believe me, they will. And yet that's a common way to get out of a conversation for people. Do you have any suggestions to seniors on what they should say when they suspect that on the other end of the line is a scammer?
Sure. So I wish I could talk to every elder and let them know that it's okay to hang up, and it's okay to protect yourselves in a way where you just hang up the phone. If it happens to be a grandparent scam or somebody who they think they may know, it's okay to hang up and call the number that they know. We'll connect them. We do have a hard time with that, and we've actually, as a task force, we have come up with those, and we give them to elders with the File for Life paperwork when we have interactions with them. But we actually noticed that it's not always a charismatic voice on the other line. I just learned actually last night in Kennebunk, somebody fell victim to a scam because they felt harassed. So they forwarded almost $5,000 to a routing number that they don't even know who it's attached to because of the fear of intimidation. So we not only see the charismatic, loving voice, we also get that intimidation and harassment that just says, I'll give you some money so you'll stop.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Senator Casey.
Thanks so much. I'll start with Erica Flavin about the story you told and the testimony. You, at one point in your testimony, talked about, and I think I'm quoting it directly from the testimony, while a banker doesn't have the right to stop my father from taking out his money, I fail to see how a bank representative is going to going up to someone and talking to them about it is that should not be allowed. We worry that kind of education or that kind of alert is sometimes not possible. The legislation Jerry Moran and I are reintroducing has as its foundation an advisory committee that would ensure that banks and other businesses have both information and tools so they can train their employees. Do you think if that were in place, do you think it's less likely that your family would have had this horrific experience? Or what do you think about that as an idea?
I think it's an excellent idea. I think a lot of it depends on the words that are used. I'm sure that if somebody had come up to my father in the bank and said, we're noticing that you're taking out these large amounts of money. Can you just sit with me a moment so that I can share some information about scams that are targeting people in general, not just seniors. But I think if it had been worded like that, my father definitely would have sat down and listened. My father's a talker. He loves to talk to people, and he would have been very receptive to that type of conversation.
Mm-hmm. So we're hoping that we can have better training. That's one way to engage in preventative activities. I was struck as well by the language in your testimony, or the references in your testimony, to the emotion of this. Mm-hmm. You said at one point, I think it's page 3, that even sadder, there, quote, "There's nothing to protect them or anyone from these emotional transactions."
Correct.
And then you talk about the aftermath when you refer on the next page to the emotional wreckage. That's why it's so difficult for people to understand how this can happen. It's very easy when you're looking in the rearview mirror in the light of recollection, or in the light of kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, that somehow people should have been aware. Probably the most pernicious part of this, at least initially, other than the actual theft, is the playing upon emotion. And it's very hard for anyone after the fact to recreate that emotional moment. And that's why I've always said this can happen to anyone, mm-hmm. at any age, in any circumstance, any level of education. This is because we're all likely to be duped if we have an emotional stake in the crime where people are using that emotion. So I hope that you'll continue to tell us what you hope we would do by way of legislation or policy based upon your own family's experience. And I know it's difficult for your parents, your family, to understand this, but little by little, we hope that burden that they've been carrying around will be lifted as they begin to help, and have already helped, mm-hmm. People around the country. And so with the passage of time and with the prevention, I wish we could show them every person who was helped by their courage, by their coming forward. It would have been easier for them to say, it's bad enough that we were ripped off, let's just keep quiet about it and move on. So please convey to them our thanks. I know I'm almost out of time, but I'll just quickly present a question to Attorney General Schmidt. Thank you for your testimony, bringing the substantial experience you bring to these issues. And I know you've done a lot of work on robocalls. And you've been engaged in the fight against these robocalls. How do you think we can tackle that problem? And do you think there's a need to fight this problem more internationally? And any suggestions you have for that?
Senator Casey, I think maybe just a couple of thoughts on that. One, the vast, vast majority of these calls originate offshore, virtually all of them. As I always tell constituents who express distress to me with some frequency that I'm on the no-call list, but I'm getting more calls than ever. I'm sure you've heard that repeatedly, and it's certainly true. I usually tell them, you know, you're not going to believe this, but the no-call list actually works. It actually prevents law-abiding telemarketers from calling you if they're disqualified from calling you as a general matter. And if they don't, we can find them and punish them and stop the behavior. The problem is that the explosion in volume is by crooks who are offshore, beyond the reach of state and local law enforcement in almost every case. And so we have no choice. We must work and rely upon our federal partners in any enforcement action, which is only conceivably possible in the minority of cases where somebody can actually find who's doing the calling. Senator Collins, in her opening, referenced the enforcement action in South Asia in 2016. That's a prime example of success that we're all thrilled with. Of course, as soon as those folks were gone, others flooded back into the marketplace. And so we will, in my view, never solve this problem on the enforcement end. We must continue enforcement, but that won't fix it. It has to be prevention. And of course, it's the rise in whenever that was, the 90s or I'm not a historian, I'm not a techie, but whenever fiber connected us with the rest of the world in a way that it had not before, and so it became possible to make virtually free VoIP calls or other calls if you have a laptop and access to the internet from anywhere in the world into every living room in the United States. When that became possible, this problem exploded. And in my view, it will only be when the technology that enabled it is countered by a technological antidote that is simple to use, effective, and readily available to consumers that will have meaningful blocking. And that requires the telecom companies to be, and they are, but that's why I don't think there is a solution here without an ongoing conversation with the folks that provide the telecom services.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to explain to our new members that we call on people based on first come, first served as far as appearance after the gavel has fallen. And many of you arrived at the same time, so then we go by seniority on the committee. And applying that complicated formula, Senator McSally would be the next questioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for your testimony. And Ms. Lavin, thanks for telling your story. We all, I think, with our parents or those we know are older, think of our own experiences. I think my mom coming from you have to answer the phone. You have to talk to whoever calls. We've now trained her where she doesn't answer the phone. She doesn't know the number. She knows to hang up. And so we all have our personal experiences with that. The education is so important, and having a team of people around you to help prevent. We've got a scam squad in Pima County where you've got seniors working with the Sheriff's Department trying to teach each other and help each other and encourage that training. And we've seen really strong results from that. I held a forum when I was in the House in my district to have more education. So this education is key. You've all talked about it. Ms. Simeone, Maine has a lot of rural areas, just like in Arizona. We have so many of our seniors that are out in rural or tribal areas and not connected anywhere. So what the challenge of education and getting to them in these rural areas, can you speak to that and any initiatives that we could partner with you in Arizona?
Yes, absolutely. I think about this a lot. When we place flyers everywhere saying come to our senior scam road shows or come to our education, we get a great group, but it's really not the group that we need to reach. And so I really think about this a lot. And I'm actually teaming up with a local videographer, and even if you're in rural, wherever, you still have, we call it the local Channel 5. So it's a local channel on your TV that just kind of goes on and on and on. And I've noticed as a responder on the front line, even going to medical calls, that for some reason is always on an elder's TV when I respond. And so for me, I think maybe delivering a message through that vessel would be really good, because it's not going to be the people who come to my forums or the ones that would listen to us about elder abuse. It's the ones that we need to indirectly contact, and I think that would be a great way, is public service announcements, but make them human, make them from that area with contact numbers from that area. I think that would be a really good avenue to explore.
Great, thank you. Attorney General Schmidt, Attorney General Brnovich in Arizona, they've been doing some great work related to the senior scams. Governor Ducey yesterday announced in his State of the State that 100,000 people will move to Arizona this year, which is great news. I mean, we want more people to come and participate and live in our great state. Many of them are seniors. We have a growing senior population, 17% right now, will grow to 21% by 2050. As you're seeing and partnering with the federal government, are you seeing that they're kind of getting out in front of the demographic shifts and are going to make sure the resources are there for the communities that are growing senior communities, and how's that partnership going?
And Senator, respectfully, I hope that not too many of those 100,000 were Kansans before they became Arizonans. Obviously, the demographic dynamics are different in different states. Yeah. And to your point, I certainly can't speak from a global perspective. I can tell you our experience from a Kansas perspective, and that is that the federal agencies have, on the whole, been receptive and open. They have wanted to be helpful. They have done the right things when asked, sometimes not expeditiously, but they've done the right things when asked. But at the end of the day, the vast, vast majority of this subject matter, to the extent it's dealt with by the law enforcement community, it must be dealt with by state and local authorities, because the nature of the crimes are state and local crimes. And doesn't matter how many federal resources you put in, ultimately there are going to be more state and local bodies than there are federal bodies. And that's particularly true the more rural you get, because the federal agencies tend to be housed in the more populous cities in I think every state, certainly in ours. So the answer to your question is, I think, yes, there's a receptivity and an openness and a willingness, but there's also an inherent understanding of the limits on the federal government's role. And where we maybe have some room for growth is on building some of those partnerships where it's not just we do more through the feds, it's that the feds help us do more through the state and local authorities. Great.
Last quick question. You mentioned one piece of legislation in the House to remove a barrier. Is there any other legislative barriers that you see that we could address?
Well, I'll bet there are, but that's the only one I'll bring to your attention because it's the one I am conversant in and focused on. I really think it's kind of a no-brainer, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
Ms. Kozlowski, do you know of any other federal barriers to improving in this area?
I do not.
Okay, great. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Rosen, welcome.
Thank you. I thank Senator Collins, Senator Casey, and of course the panelists for sharing these personal and heartbreaking stories. It's really important we bring this to light. I just met with our Nevada Legal Aid just last week, and of course in Nevada we have a large senior population, so they are huge targets, and of course these crimes we know are on the rise. I myself left my job to be a caregiver for both my parents and in-laws. That experience taught me all too well about how vulnerable our seniors are, as my own father-in-law was contacted one day from a big box realtor to come pick up his purchase for $5,000 worth of computer equipment. The fraudster was not so smart and realized my father-in-law had a rewards account when they tried to use the name, so they used the phone number from that. And he went down to this big box realtor store, and was able to cancel that and cancel the fraud. We kind of determined that it was probably done through the doctor's office when we were able to backtrack that. And so I know we've talked about reaching out, educating, how do we do this, public service announcements, television, digital, mail, but how do we stop the fraud? We talk about the banks, the employees noticing things. How do we educate people, big box retailers, in our doctor's offices, so the employees see that they should be careful if someone else is using the information, how they handle this sensitive information that was used in my own father-in-law's case to perpetrate fraud against his identity.
I found that when my father went to speak to the banker afterwards, and the banker had a lack of knowledge about laws that were already on the books that would have allowed him to have that conversation with my father. I think at the core of it, though, is that we are we are the village that needs to protect the elders. And even if that law wasn't in place, I'm kind of shocked that nobody said anything to my dad about this. Just seems kind of off. And let us help you. Is there somebody else that we could contact for you to confirm that all of this is truly going on? My father was told at the beginning of all of this that there was a gag order. His lack of knowledge about how the criminal justice system worked certainly worked against him.
So would you think it'd be helpful in expanding the reach of people who are able to talk to our seniors if they're attacked besides banks, to our retailers, perhaps, especially our doctor's offices, for sure?
Absolutely.
I believe we need to humanize this a little bit more. We talk about education, and education sometimes is in forms of lectures, but I think it's more effective when it comes in forms of stories. Reaching out, touching the hearts. These are real life stories. For me, real Mainers being victims. I think it kind of puts you in part of, we call it the big puzzle. You're a piece of the puzzle now. You understand this, you feel it. You have the heart, now let's do something about it. So I think lectures are good, don't get me wrong, but I think humanizing it, telling a story is really more effective, whether it's the UPS worker or a law enforcement officer.
I always think about this in terms of who touches the life of an older adult.
That's what I'm...
I too left work to take care of my parents when they were in their 90s. My dad just turned 98 on Saturday. I always think about that. Who else? Who are we missing?
The Postal Service.
Well, the Postal Service is phenomenal.
Yes.
And letter carriers report all the time.
They
are. I cannot sing their praises high enough. But who else? I mean, we've got EMTs who are now beginning to be trained. We have doctors' offices are a wonderful venue because so much information is available there. So much information to be used in a not very good way for older adults. And also, it's also a place where older adults go.
A lot.
They talk to their doctor. Maybe they don't talk to the doctor because the doctor has the golden stethoscope, but they might talk to the nurse. You might learn something that would be important in that person's life. There have also been initiatives in faith communities because older adults generally still go to church or in some form of worship. There has been some training with clergy, because it's another place that touches the life of an older adult. And I think as we look about training and we talk about a larger conversation, we always have to keep those ideas in mind. I certainly did with my parents and continue to now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Braun, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be on the committee. Not only this subject, but cost of health care and other things very important. Heard Senator Casey mention, as I step back in, about getting bank employees and others kind of to be a heads up. I look at the different ways that these scams are so unbelievably complex and creative and ingenious, but you really don't perpetrate it until the money transfers. And when I look at an electronic wire transfer or a certified check, that's, kind of something that's complicated even when you want to do it. When it comes to credit cards and debit cards and so forth, it seems like that might be an easier way to, consummate the scam. What are you finding among banks, number one, especially as it would apply to wire transfers, which is you got to go through a protocol that's fairly complicated to do one, even when I'd initiate one myself. And it seems like that's where you'd get larger amounts. Tell me something, whoever would have the information, where are you seeing banks when it comes to their helping prevent this at the final stage?
I can address that briefly. There are some really robust ongoing training programs right now. There's one that I will be rolling out, I think, this year from AARP called Bank Safe. that will be available to, to banks to even download from the AARP website, the BankSafe website, that is, that I think will help, transform training for tellers and supervisors. But I think when I think about this issue, I always think about the supervisors. I think about that with regard to securities transactions as well. It's great to train the front line, but that supervisor better be involved too and have some accountability for whatever else happens. I know that there's also bank training that has been rolled out by the American Bankers Association as well. I think that there are the red flags are also something that should be on the desk of everyone who works in a financial institution, however we want to, formulate them on elder abuse and financial exploitation. But as soon as that happens, that wire transfer becomes infinitely more difficult to execute.
And I'm thinking more along the lines of an algorithm or a mechanical system that would not rely on training, to where at that final moment there's something that, sets off a red flag to where you can't, consummate the whole transaction.
I know that there has been some serious interest in looking at my personal view has always been if we can stop credit card transactions, we must be able to stop money leaving older adults accounts. We can do it in any number of ways, and I've talked to many people about that. It's a big project, to be sure, but I still think there's a technological solution to that. There's a small company called EverSafe that has a series of alerts which can alert you or family members if there's some unusual transaction that has occurred across all kinds of financial accounts. So I think the technology is there. I think we have to figure out what would be the best public-private partnership to have it go forward, but I certainly believe it's there.
And one final question. When it comes to credit card companies, they've got a more robust fraud detection component to their business. Are they catching most of these when they do occur through is there any type of statistic or any information on how much is actually thwarted or prevented?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Jones.
Thank you, Chairman Collins, and thank you for having this hearing, you and Ranking Member Casey. And I also want to lend my welcome to all the new members. Chairman Collins, looking around, this aging committee may, in terms of seniority, have on a per capita basis the youngest number of senators here. We've got a number of former prosecutors that are on this committee, and so I've been especially interested in listening to the federal-state partnerships. We've got state prosecutors, we've got federal prosecutors, and I think all of us have found that has been a tremendous advantage in our respective offices. So I'd like to talk a little bit, and Officer Simeone, you mentioned a little bit more for help from the federal government. Attorney General Schmidt, you have mentioned your the collaborative effort with HHS. And by the way, you and I might want to do some comparative DNA based on your conversations about your mother and hanging up. We may be long-lost siblings. So I get that. I understand, and I have witnessed that firsthand. But could you initially talk a little bit about your federal-state partnership and how you think that can be improved, encouraged, what we can do from here, and then maybe Officer Simeone or Ms. Kozlowski, if you have any suggestions of what Congress can do, because those partnerships are incredibly informative. And while most of these cases may be state cases because of the individual amounts, there's still a lot of federal jurisdiction with wire fraud, mail fraud, those kind of things. So I'll just let y'all take it from there.
Senator, thank you, and I'd be happy to share a little bit on that. So I've been in office, I've been there 8 years now. I'd been in office maybe 2 or 3 years. I was relatively new, and I was approached by a fairly young man who was a federal employee, worked with HHS OIG. He had recently been transferred at that point into the Kansas City regional office. He had been, I think, in Illinois before, and I don't know where he is now. He's no longer in Kansas City, and we've lost touch. But he looked me up, and he said, here's the deal. He said, when I was in Illinois, we got frustrated that we would find, we'd be out investigating whatever it is we investigate at HHS OIG, and we would come across these cases of home health care fraud in the Medicaid program, usually billing for services just not provided, billing for hours that the PCA didn't show up. So not close calls. But sometimes we'd find ones, if they're big losses, no problem, we'll get them prosecuted. But sometimes it'd be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. And we just couldn't get the attention of the U.S. Attorney's Office, not because they didn't want to, but because they're up to their eyeballs and everything else. He said, we've done the work, we've got the case, I can't get anyone to prosecute it. In that case, they couldn't get the local DAs to prosecute it because it's the Medicaid program, and it just, yeah. So they wound up partnering, he told me, in Illinois for a sweep, and he proposed we do the same in Kansas, and I said yes. So here's what we did. My only condition was I'd be thrilled to partner with you and do those cases. I don't care how small they are, we'll do them. My only condition is I want to do them in state court under state law. I don't want to have to retrain my people. I don't want to have to march into federal court for a $1,000 case. In state court, it's just easier. We're accustomed to it. He said, deal. So they worked up, we did this sweep, HHS OIG out of Kansas City agents worked up, I think it was around a dozen, give or take, home health fraud cases. We called it Operation No Show, the fun part of any law enforcement operation, naming it right. These were all people that billed for services they just didn't show up to provide. They were pretty straightforward. Presented them as Medicaid fraud criminal cases under the state Medicaid fraud statute, and we prosecuted them all in state court. And we won them all but one. One didn't go as well, but the rest of them went very well. And it was a fantastic partnership. We were thrilled because we were able to do more cases. I had prosecution capacity. My bottleneck was on the investigation side. He was thrilled because his agents who had done work were able to finish it off and see it through, and it was the right outcome for everybody. We haven't replicated that since he left on the Medicaid fraud side, but it's just, I've thought of that ever since and thought that is an ideal model, I think, in other areas. So, you know, I've mentioned it a time or two. I had this discussion with then Attorney General Sessions at the news conference you mentioned when we announced the sweep a year or two ago. I forget exactly when it was. He seemed intrigued, but obviously he's no longer around to follow through. I had the discussion with Mr. Cottrell, the postal inspector. He's no longer around. I had it last week with Mr. Barksdale, the, I think, interim or deputy or acting postal inspector. He's intrigued. I plan to call him and follow up. This is a good model.
It works.
It works.
Anybody else want to briefly, before, you know, what specifically we might could federal court do?
Yeah, so sure, real quick. When I started my career, we played what was called pass the case. So we're bound by jurisdiction. So municipal officers generally take cases in their municipal bounds. If it crosses the federal threshold, we would just pass the case. Now we actually work together. I work often with the U.S. postal investigators, some FBI agents, and we work together on these cases. So I've already seen a really good change. I think we're moving in the right direction. I don't think we have to make huge, drastic changes. I think if we focus on the multidisciplinary approach, we continue to work together as a team, I think we're going to be very, very successful.
I agree, and I would like to underscore what Attorney General Schmidt said. I'm a big believer in using the regional offices of the federal government to be enfolded in this work. We have regional offices all over the country. Oftentimes, we only look at the office that is in Washington to do these cases. I think there are lots of good people that work in those regional offices that bring to these cases a regional aspect, and I think that we could incorporate them more in this work with the state work of similar kinds.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, one quick observation, because we've talked a lot, I've heard a lot today, too, about outreach and community outreach. And the one thing I would encourage, as we have discussed, the population is getting older. More people are turning age 65 every day, and so that outreach needs to be done early for people down the road, whether it's financial literacy or being aware. We can't do a lot about the cognitive decline that we see in our elders, but we can at least maybe, as those hit age 65, arm them with better information going forward. So thank you all for being here and for the work you do.
Thank you. Senator Scott, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. First off, it's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your hard work. And I look forward to looking at the bill you proposed. You know, Florida's a state with a lot of seniors, and we're getting more every year. I was going to, when Senator McSally was here, I was going to remind her that Florida will add about 400,000 people this year, and a lot of them are going to be seniors. It's a great place to retire and enjoy life. First off, Slavin, my heart goes out to you, what happened to your family. Unfortunately, you hear stories like that all across the country. We have a lot in Florida. We've been blessed. In my 8 years as governor, I had an attorney general that was very focused on this. Attorney General Bondi was very aggressive at prosecuting scam artists, and we were able to get a lot of legislation passed. And I know she worked with you, General Schmidt. All of you, it looks like you've done a great job trying to do this. What is the best way to find best practices and share them at all different, whether it's the federal level, the state level, or at the local level, so we make sure, at every level we're finding the best ideas and getting them around the country, so we do everything we can to stop this?
Senator, I'll take a crack at that. I don't know if it's the best way, but we've struggled with that question on our watch, and I'll tell you where we've come down. One of the challenges on the education, the dissemination of information, whatever tool, method, target audience you use, one of the challenges is everybody agrees that it's a good idea, and therefore everybody wants to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to discourage it on the whole, but sometimes the messages become either conflicting, or even if they're harmonious, if you're the victim of one of these scams or ripoffs, and you're trying to figure out what to do, you don't want to sit there and sort through a stack of possible people to contact to ask for help. That becomes intimidating and distressing in and of itself. So one of the things we've done in Kansas, and we don't get, I don't claim credit for it, we stole the idea shamelessly from Arkansas, now former Attorney General Arkansas, had started it up. They actually paid a market research firm several years back before I was in office to figure out in Arkansas why they were getting fewer requests for assistance at their Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division than the demographics and size of the state would suggest they should be receiving. And the answer came back, perhaps not surprisingly, because people, when they've been ripped off, don't want to sit in their living room and practice law, and they're intimidated. The AG's website's talking about statutes and duties and all this stuff. It looks governmental. They don't know if it's a securities issue or an insurance fraud or a general consumer fraud. Do I call the local police? Do I call 911? Do I call the FBI? Do I call the FTC? What do I do? And people would just throw their hands up and not ask for help. And so they rebranded in Arkansas. I don't know if they're still doing this or not. They just rebranded their Consumer Protection Division at the AG's office. They called it Got Your Back Arkansas. We stole that from them, but we had enough pride not to just say Got Your Back Kansas. So we're in your corner, Kansas, and ours is still going. And it's been fantastic. It's a branded website. I use it on all of our consumer protection and elder abuse outreach efforts around the state, whether I'm doing it or our staff is. We use it in talking with other agencies in the state. Come on and be a part of the In Your Corner Kansas conversation. And the message is simple. If you've been ripped off and you're victimized, contact us. We're in your corner, Kansas, and we'll either help you or we'll get you to the people who can let us practice law or navigate the bureaucracy. To back that up, to your question, we also have we call it now a Senior Consumer Protection Advisory Council. I'm about to overhaul it and make it more of a broader Elder Justice Advisory Council. We've quarterbacked it at the AG's office. We've invited in the players, and we're sitting down now and saying, all right, we've got this website, we've got this branding, we've got this one-stop outreach. Everybody needs to be on the same page. What do we need on there? What do we need to know for your agency, for your private entity? How do we get people properly connected? What's the right subject matter? What's the right content? And so far it's working, I think, reasonably well. And we've seen our numbers go up in requests for assistance, which I think is a good thing.
Anybody else?
I think when delivering a message, it really has to be unique to the area. So what may work in the state of Maine may not work in a different state. So I think it just needs to be a vessel of people, a multidisciplinary team who understands the geographic area of the message that needs to be delivered. And that doesn't only mean elders, it means professionals. So what I mean by that is peer lectures or peer stories. So I know for me in the law enforcement community, I'm more receptive to other law enforcement officers educating me. And so also with elders, I know me going to speak to an elder, we may not have a lot of similarities, but if I could bring somebody along who may be of the same age, they may reach that message a little bit better than I could. So I think it has to be unique, and I think people need to really study and have passion for their specific areas and deliver the message that they think would be well received in that particular area. So I think it's all different.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Sinema, welcome to the committee.
Thank Thank you so much, Chairman Collins and Ranking Member Casey. It is an honor to be a member of the Special Committee on Aging. And Chairman Collins, in particular, it's a pleasure to continue doing the work that we've been doing together to protect seniors from financial fraud. I was proud last year to lead the Senior Safe Act in the House, and I am so grateful for your effort to lead that bipartisan effort through the Senate. I also want to thank Ranking Member Casey for his support of that very important law. As we've heard today, criminals are relentless in targeting vulnerable senior citizens, and that's why the Senior Safe Act, which we passed last year, is so critical. You know, it empowers people and financial institutions to report those exact suspected instances of elder financial abuse and fraud, and it helps law enforcement track down the criminals who target those vulnerable seniors. The law was modeled after a highly successful effort, of course, in Maine, the Senior Safe program, that innovatively brought together the regulators, financial firms, and legal organizations. So we did the same in Arizona, bringing together IRS experts and advocates to help teach seniors in the greater Phoenix community how to recognize and report frauds and scams like one that targeted a 91-year-old woman in Tucson. This woman had two caregivers that she trusted, but they exploited her. They got access to her banking information, and they stole her identity. They stole nearly $200,000 from this 91-year-old woman by obtaining credit cards in her name. They gave themselves very large holiday bonuses, and they even convinced her to sell her home. And had the employees at her bank been trained to recognize the pattern of suspicious charges and been able to report that to authorities, we believe the criminals probably would not have been able to victimize this woman for 2 years. And we know that that financial crime is a growing crisis in our country, and it certainly is a crisis in Arizona, which welcomes retirees from across the United States. Just in 2018 alone, the Arizona Department of Economic Security received over 31,000 reports of potential abuse or fraud involving senior citizens. As we know, that represents probably only a fraction of the crimes that occurred. And that's completely unacceptable. So these are people who've worked hard their entire lives, they've raised their families, many have served our country in the military, and they should get to enjoy their golden years with dignity. But according to the AARP, 1 in 5 Arizona seniors are victimized by financial fraud every single year. And as we've heard today, often the seniors are afraid or perhaps embarrassed to report when they've been defrauded. Sometimes they may not even be aware or don't want to recognize that they have been victimized. So what I'd like to do is start with my first question for Ms. Kozlowski. Your testimony mentioned that the financial services and tech industries have been strong partners in the fight against elder financial exploitation. So building on the passage of our law last year, the Senior Safe Act, where are there current gaps in prevention, detection, and enforcement actions to address financial fraud that are disguised as legitimate transactions?
I think there are, I'm always, having done this work for so long, I'm always encouraged, surprised, and disappointed at the enthusiasm for entrepreneurship of the people who want to take other people's money. So I don't know that I could give you a particular area because I think what's happened is that by bringing together so many people in the, especially the broker-dealer community and investment advisor community, I think that there has been such heightened awareness in that particular sector that I don't think that unusual scams coming to a particular account are now going to be noticed. Mm-hmm. If you are a person who has invested in a particular way over a long period of time and suddenly you're coming to your advisor or your broker and saying, no, I really want to buy those individual airplanes that fly at 50 feet above because I'm sick of the bad traffic, the investment advisor is going to say, like, no, we're not going to be doing that. They have now tools. They have a trusted contact to say, is there something wrong with Uncle Fred? Has something changed? Do we need to address this further, or we can just stop that transaction until we find out what on earth is going on? That's been huge, absolutely huge. And I think that we also see that just having investment advisors be required to meet with their clients once a year is also something, and bringing in that trusted contact form, not just for older Americans and older adults, but for anybody. I always use in my discussions the car accident. You know, you're in a car. That doesn't discriminate on age. That could happen to anybody at any moment. You should be prepared for that. And in banking, I think that there are gaps in training. there are always going to be the people that didn't get that, particular web training. I think there's such movement, particularly in cooperation in financial services. There are going to be transactions by type. I'm sorry, I couldn't describe that right now, but I see such a huge change. And there's also, I know, a very effective business case to keep the asset in the institution, and I think that that's being realized.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Not least, I'm very pleased to welcome Senator Hawley to the committee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for your leadership on this committee and on this set of issues. Ranking Member Casey, thank you as well. And thanks to all of the witnesses for being here today. Yet I come to this job new, of course, but what I was doing just before this was the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of my state. Nice to see you, General Schmidt, a former colleague. I was Attorney General of the state of Missouri, and I can say, having read your testimony, listened to you today, the problems that you are describing and have encountered firsthand is one, I'm sorry to say, is not unfamiliar to the state of Missouri, where we see rampant scamming, elder abuse, and fraud. This past year, we recovered, I think it was $13 million in scams that we were reverse and able to get restitution for consumers in the state of Missouri. Much of that dealing with seniors, dealing with elders. So it is a rampant problem. We've tried to be as aggressive as we can in the Attorney General's office and have had some success there. And I'm delighted to have read your testimony, heard from you today. Thank you for what you're doing, working on this serious problem. Ms. Flavin, am I saying that right, by the way? Flavin, yeah. Can I just start with you, just to ask you to describe a little bit more about your family's story? I mean, it strikes me that the people who victimized your parents did something awful, and that they made them feel that they couldn't talk to or couldn't talk about a family crisis with their children. And this is this emotional manipulation. Can you just tell us, like, what was that like as a family? Why is this emotional manipulation so effective sometimes, unfortunately, and also devastating as a family?
Yeah, very much so. When my father was when my parents were originally contacted, the phony lawyers kept saying that they would only talk to my parents at the same time. So they were able to convince and create this emotional connection between both of them, as opposed to trying to play off one or the other. At the start of this, my father was told that he was now under a court gag order. So the only person he could discuss this with was the phony attorney. And their lack of how the criminal justice system works, I think, was a huge factor in this scam being allowed to be perpetrated against them. I was well aware of the grandparent scam, and I know if my parents had called me and said, hey, we got this phone call, and I'm really concerned about it, from this lawyer in Tennessee about Michael Ryan. And I'm going, no, don't send them any money. It's a scam. I knew that. I was aware of it because of an AARP article that they ran last year. So, and I had even gone up to them when I went to visit in May, that I'd said, listen, if you ever get a phone call about my son and he's in jail, it's okay to hang up and let him sit. So I'm not winning any Mother of the Year awards, but I would know that it was a scam. So my father is acting under the impression that he has this court gag order, so he can't tell anybody. And my whole response when I first found out about it was actually through a posting on Facebook that my nephew, the alleged DUIer, posted on there. I'm like, we're a family, and I don't care if there's a gag order. No judge is going to put you in jail for violating that type of gag order. No reasonable person. I says, we're a family. So not only do we get to enjoy the benefits of going through all the good stuff, you get to go through all the bad stuff too, because that's what a family is. And as a result of this, speaking of family, there is a piece of property that my parents have owned for 4 generations. It was purchased by my grandfather. It's lakefront property. My grandfather purchased it when my father was about 15 years old, helped put up the little shack that my grandfather made out of pallets or scavenged wood. My parents bought it, I think, when I was 15 or 16 from them. So I've used it. My grandfather's used it. My father's used it. I've used it. My son has used it. This now has to be sold to make up for that deficit. And that's, to me, that's the killer.
Yeah.
That right there.
Yeah. Thank you for being here today and for being willing to share your family story. Yeah, thank you. General Schmidt, just in the few moments that I have remaining here, you've talked a bit about the Fraud and Abuse Litigation Division that you started in Kansas. Would you just say, talk to us a little bit about some of the lessons learned from that, what you found that has been successful, what has, what are things that perhaps you didn't expect that you have found that have worked well, and what might that say to other law enforcement agents at the local, state, or federal level about tackling this problem?
As you well know, and the committee knows, every state's different in our structure for criminal investigation and prosecution. Kansas is, and I think the plurality or majority of states, but certainly not the not everybody does it this way, but I don't have original criminal jurisdiction in most cases. There are a few exceptions, Medicaid fraud and a couple of others, but generally speaking, we're a local DA, local county attorney. They've got to ask us for help and invite us in. And that's relevant to this discussion. So, we have limited resources like everybody else. We look at what we were being asked to help with, and we focused our training capacity building on homicides, child sex crimes, major drug crimes, cartel type stuff, or big manufacturing cases, and some public misconduct, corruption type cases that are awkward to handle locally. That's our core. That's where we put our primary resources. We discovered over time we were being asked with great frequency by county and district attorneys, mostly the county attorneys in the small and mid-sized jurisdictions, because the big jurisdictions tend to have sufficiently robust resources. We were being asked to help with elder abuse cases, sometimes physical or sexual abuse, but often financial abuse, usually fiduciary or trusted individual abuse, but sometimes just random scam stuff. And we were turning them down because we didn't have the resources. We were up to our eyeballs in all those other violent crimes I mentioned, and we didn't have to take them because they're local. And that's the kind of stuff that leaves you sleepless at night. So we finally figured out, after a lot of trial and error that I'll spare you unless you're just fascinated by it, it is impossible, at least in Kansas, for me to put that type of financial crimes, elder abuse crimes capacity in my regular criminal division, because I'll always make the choice to take the next homicide, not the next $20,000 elder abuse case. That's the right choice, but it leaves you where you started. So we had to spin it off. We broke it out, created a separate criminal division dedicated only to financial crimes and elder abuse of any sort. Had to figure out how to pay for it, and for us it wasn't an option at that point in time to just go ask for new money, and I'm not even sure that was the right thing. So we persuaded our legislature to overhaul our insurance fraud statutes and our securities fraud statutes and an existing statute on the abuse, neglect, and exploitation of vulnerable populations. Pool some money out of those that was already in the system and require that those cases all get referred to us for prosecution. And my argument was whole's greater than the sum of the parts. A lot of fraud on elders is insurance related or securities related anyway, not all of it, but a lot. So there's a logic, and you give me that, I'll do those cases, and with the capacity that's left, we'll do more run-of-the-mill elder abuse cases, and we're doing them. We've been doing this about 2 years now. We've gone from 0 capacity to, I think I now have 4 prosecutors, and we're trying to add a 5th. I have 3 sworn officers. We're trying to add another, and I have some other clerical folks. And essentially, we view that unit, that division, it is a criminal prosecution unit first and foremost, but it is also now the focal point in Kansas in the criminal justice system for driving the conversation, best practices, sharing experiences on the elder abuse side. So we're stealing ideas from Johnson County, Kansas City, and from Wichita that have robust capacity, and we're trying to push them out into the western part of the state and the southeast where our help is more needed. And it's been a very, very good conduit.
Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today and for doing an extraordinary job, both on the front lines, but also in advancing our understanding of this problem. Officer Simeone mentioned that telling a story is often the most effective way to connect with people. So in my closing remarks, I want to tell a story. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, I received an email that appeared to be from my nephew. It had the correct email address from him. Turned out his account had been hacked. And it said, "Dear Aunt Susan, I'm abroad. I've been robbed and mugged, and all of my money's been taken. My airline ticket is gone, and I can't get back to the United States. Could you please wire me some money to the Western Union office?" And I guess I'm not as kind as Mrs. Flavin's parents, fortunately. I thought it was real. It sounded like him. It was from his email address. It sounded just like him. It called me Aunt Susan, and it was signed Love, Mark. So I sent back an email that said, "Mark, you should go to the American Embassy for help," rather than, fortunately, wiring him money, because he had mentioned that his passport was stolen as well. And then I started thinking about it. I got a reply that said, "Oh, Aunt Susan, I really need to get home. I've been all beaten up, really laying on a sad story." And then I called his father, and I said, "You realize Mark is in trouble?" And it turned out Mark was at work and was not overseas on vacation, was not in trouble at all. But I can see, because of my own experience, how easily you could be drawn into the horrible situation that Ms. Flavin's parents experienced. And because I was aware as a public official that the American Embassy truly was the right place for him to go for help, I did not wire that money. And frankly, I probably would have called his parents and told them to wire the money. But it shows how clever these criminals are and how relentless they are, and how the ability to use the VoIP phone system can make them target people from faraway call centers in India, in other places, and the ability to use the internet to send emails. A common scam that we've seen seniors fall prey to is they'll get an alert on their computer saying that it's been infected with a virus, and that if they just provide their password and their other personal information, that they will fix it for $56. Well, of course, there is no virus. Not only are they out the $56, but they've inadvertently given the con artists access to their bank accounts and to other sensitive information that they have on their computers. So this does require a coordinated approach to prevent seniors from being swindled out of their life savings. And I'm so grateful for the work that all of you are doing. There's just too many cases of this happening and causing not only financial harm, but embarrassment and shame. And our seniors should not be subjected to that. It's just outrageously wrong. So I thank you all for what you're doing to combat these fraudsters, who often are part of international cartels, and more tragically, in many cases, are trusted ones known to the seniors. Those are the hardest ones of all, when it's a family member or a trusted guardian or other person, attorney, financial advisor, who, even a pastor in York County, who rips off a vulnerable senior. So we're determined to be just as relentless as these con artists are in going after this problem. Finally, I want to respond to the Attorney General's comment about the robocalls and the harassment that so many seniors are enduring. I really think that the telecommunications companies have got to step up to the plate. There is new technology that can be deployed, and we are going to have a future hearing in which we bring them in to talk about that technology. We're working with the FCC as well, and they've taken some recent action this past fall. But way more can be done to protect seniors so that they know where the call's coming from, to crack down on the spoofing, to track the call from its origination, the true origination, not what it says. In one tragic case we had of a senior who was ripped off in Portland, the call said the Portland Police Department on the caller ID. And that's why the senior turned over money for taxes that he did not owe. So we really need to use every tool that we have available. And your being here today is so important in this fight, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for being here. Committee members, we had great attendance today. Have until Friday, January 25th, to submit additional questions for the record, so you may find additional questions coming your way. Please don't hesitate if you have further suggestions for us to reach out to us. We're really always eager to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here. Senator Casey.
Thank you, Chairman Collins, for having this hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony. I think it's true of all of us when we say that no one should ever fear answering the telephone. Our loved ones should not have to fear that a con artist might be lurking on the other end of the receiver. And daughters like Erica should not have to fear receiving a call from their parents that a lifetime of savings has been lost to a thief. The work of this committee to bring together experts, law enforcement officials, and representatives of the private sector is a step in the right direction, but of course we have to do more. That's why I'm committed to ensuring that the legislation that Senator Moran and I have becomes law, the Stop Senior Scams Act, and to take other actions as well. So I'll continue to work with Chairman Collins, as we've worked together for the last number of years, and other colleagues on this committee and throughout the Senate to do everything we can to stop these crimes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I would note that Senator Klobuchar and I also have a bill, and I hope we can merge our bills and get it enacted into law during this Congress. And again, one final plug for our new fraud book. Shortly, well, in a few weeks, we will have thousands of copies available that we can distribute all over the country, and in the hopes of helping our seniors. So thank you very much for your participation. This hearing is now adjourned.
We've got our state address tonight, new governor, so I need to be back to listen to tape. Thank you very much. Likewise, thank you. Mr. Attorney General,
yes. Yep.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. You're standing up. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it very much. About 8 years now. About 8 years. Yeah, hard to believe. So, I'm trying to remember who was in Pennsylvania. The seats guys, right? The went in out with Josh, right? Oh, yes, that's right. That's right. All right, Will, thank you. Will. Thanks, Colin. They'll appreciate it. Thank you very much. Senator, thank you so much. I hope it's helpful. Right? Not just here, you're right. I'd love to do it. Well, I appreciate it. We're not going to make it. Maybe, yes. Well, official here. Thank you. Well, thanks so much.